We already voted, and what have they done? They stole it!
Treason! 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 Defend your liberty! Defend your Constitution!
If they don't do as it is their oath to do, if they don't uphold the Constitution, then we will remove them from office one way or another.
That attack, that siege, was criminal behavior, plain and simple, and it's behavior that we, the FBI, view as domestic terrorism. January 6th was not an isolated event. The problem of domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York. That warning there that you just saw from FBI Director Christopher Wray, you've seen it here before. It came over 2 months ago. But it's news again today because it did nothing to quell what he describes there as the metastasizing spread of the ex-president's big lie that the election was stolen. And instead of Arizona's audit of 2020 ballots being just some weird anomaly, it may just be the new normal, as we see more and more Americans questioning the crown jewel of our democracy, free and fair elections. New reporting in the Washington Post today paints a frightening picture of how Trump has undermined confidence among his supporters in our democracy. From that new Post reporting, quote, in emails, phone calls, and public meetings, his supporters are questioning how their elections are administered and pressing public officials to revisit the vote count, wrongly insisting that Trump won the presidential race. They detail specific and very recent examples. Quote, at a public meeting last week in Sheboygan County, Michigan, a lawyer from Detroit told county commissioners that the voting machines they used in 2020 could flip votes and throw an election. She offered to send in a forensic team at no charge to the county to inspect ballots and scanners. The Post also writes about a meeting in Windham, New Hampshire this month, where nearly 500 people protested the choice of an auditor overseeing a review of a state representative election and chanted, you guessed it, stop the steal. And it reports that in San Luis Obispo County, California, residents during a Board of Supervisors meeting called for a forensic audit as they questioned whether their votes were properly counted by machines. Cries for audits are mounting as the one underway in Maricopa County, Arizona, has reached such a level of absurdity, baselessness, and conspiracy that local Republican election officials there are railing against it now. But Trump's allies in Congress, like the newly installed number 3 Republican in the House, Elise Stefanik, QAnon follower Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Congressman Matt Gaetz, have all endorsed Arizona's faux audit. This hold of Trumpian disinformation so tight, we're still seeing elected Republicans not answer the question of whether Joe Biden was duly elected president of the United States. Here's Congressman Warren Davidson of Ohio's response to the Dispatch when asked if Biden lawfully won. Quote, I mean, obviously the law was followed. Now, the law wasn't followed in lots of states, but ultimately the process took place. You know, the Electoral College voted and the House accepted the results. I mean, not everyone, you know. There were objections, but the votes were cast, and in Congress, you fight by voting. The votes were called, and he got the votes. One insurrection later. Hi, we're now nearly 7 months from the presidential election, dozens of lawsuits, multiple recounts, and an insurrection later, and the GOP still, maybe even more, complicit in the big lie that poses an imminent threat to our country, one the Department of Homeland Security highlighted in its latest terror threat bulletin. Let me bring into our conversation Jason Johnson, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, an MSNBC and the GRIO contributor. Also joining us, Aaron Blake, Washington Post senior political reporter. Jason, I'm just sort of in shock from what is really happening, I guess, out there. And we cover it every day and we talk about it every day. But the truth is we know that election officials are on the front lines. We know that the Republican Party from the top down is at war against its own democracy because Liz Cheney told us also. And as you always say, we knew that before as well. But on this question of who's winning, what do you think?
Well, right now, I think Republicans are winning the war from the standpoint that they've got their troops at the ready, right? You still have too many Democrats who are in Congress, certainly Democrats in the Senate, who are saying, I don't know if if we need to push this through. I don't know how necessary it is. So if Knowing is half the battle. The Republicans know what the battle is. They seem to be prepared. And for every single example, and I really, really enjoyed that interview. You had two fantastic secretaries of state. For every example like that, Nicole, that we just saw, we also have the Brian Kemps. Right? There are plenty of secretaries in the state in this country who are not willing to do this kind of work, who are willing to pander to this kind of nonsense. And that's where the real danger is, that it's dependent on the moral character and the professionalism of individuals who, quite frankly, the young lady said, she's like, well, I'm nervous sometimes. People tried to kill the governor of Michigan over masks. I'd be terrified if I was the Secretary of State. I'd be terrified if I was a campaign volunteer right now. And that's why this is dangerous. Republicans are winning the battle because Democrats and those who care about democracy are on their feet. They need to push back with laws, legislation, and a lack of tolerance for this kind of anti-democratic action.
Well, and Aaron Blake, I think something you've written goes to that point. For Republicans, this is war. And it doesn't matter if on the other side of the line is a family member. You write this. Trump attacks your family, your wife, your mom? No big deal in today's GOP. Pence, Cruz. Political ambition and expediency have long led people to do rather inexplicable things. But very high on that list would seem to be shrugging off attacks on one's own family members in the name of towing the party line. Even if most anything is fair in political warfare, lodging attacks involving the heritage and appearance of one's wife or mother would seem about as close to a red line as you could get. But as with most every seemingly unwritten rule of politics, Trump has bulldozed this one. He has rendered high-profile members of his party uninterested in enforcing it. Pence was his brother yesterday was a no vote against the commission. Cruz is legend. You also mentioned George P. Bush. Just talk about this dynamic. It's really interesting. I haven't seen anyone else pick up on it.
Yeah, really, the Pence situation was the impetus for this. Of course, Vice President Pence was targeted by many of the people who stormed the Capitol. Not only that, but the president's first words as this Capitol was being stormed was to attack Mike Pence. And since then, the timeline as it's been assembled, to the extent that it has been assembled, has suggested that the president at least had some knowledge of the danger, not just that lawmakers were in, but that Vice President Pence could have been in. But if you look back, even in recent weeks, we have Mitch McConnell, who really is looking like he's casting the decisive vote against this commission. When he came out against this on Wednesday, he looks like he's going to marshal support against this January 6th commission. It wasn't that long ago that the president was, the former president was lodging attacks about the Chinese ties of his Taiwan-born wife, calling Mitch McConnell really mean things. George P. Bush is another great example. The rest of his family is very much against Donald Trump and has come out against him increasingly so over the years. But we have the one really Bush who has a ramping up political career. He might run for Texas Attorney General and has really towed that Trump line over the years. And so I think this really reinforces what we've seen, especially with this commission debate, also to a large extent with all the talk about voter fraud and irregularities in the election. It's that Republicans are really playing a rather ruthless game here. And when it comes to criticisms of their family members, the fact that they're willing to shrug those off in the name of ambition, in the name of coming together as a party, I think really just kind of tells the tale of what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years.
Jason, Aaron Blake used the word ruthless, and I think that's a word that I haven't found yet, and I'm grateful to him for putting that on this mission. I want to ask you about something that I've wrestled with. You've got more clarity than I do, but I understand better than anyone the appetite to turn the page on Donald Trump. I try not to say his name. I try to call him the disgraced ex-president. But what he has uncorked, what is happening now, is worse than what happened at any moment of his presidency. What he has uncorked is a unorganized but vast anti-democratic movement. Its oxygen is disinformation. They view Fox News as the medium source. We think Fox is outrageous. To his supporters, they're in the center. They view Fox as center-right because to its right is all that other stuff, Newsmax, OAN, and whatnot. Right. What do you view this moment for? What do you view sort of this moment as in terms of navigating what we're watching? And yesterday's vote is one example. Kevin McCarthy sending his deputy, John Katko, to negotiate a bill that he then attacked and whipped up votes against. How do you explain what is happening on the other side of the aisle?
So this is really important, Nicole. I think Aaron made a great point when he said ruthlessness and people not defending your families. You know, African-American colloquialism, right? You can debate somebody as much as you want, but the moment they say your mama, right, like, that's when you get mad. It's like, okay, this is over. This is over. There's a limit, right? The Republicans have moved past that limit. You can attack wives, children, husbands. Nobody cares because they are worshiping a cult of Donald Trump. And Trump has become the avatar for all this. And as long as Trump is there, they're going to engage in this kind of behavior. What I fear, Nicole, more than anything else is, I've said all along, this has been brewing for decades. This was starting back with Newt Gingrich. This was starting back in the 2000 election. This has been growing for decades, for most of my semi-adult life at this particular point. But what frightens me is I try and think as a political scientist 20, 30 years in the future. I don't want us to look back on this point and say, you know what, we probably should have seen this coming. We should have probably seen that a group of people who can be okay with individuals marching into the Capitol and trying to hang Mike Pence aren't the kind of people you can ever work with again. We're not dealing with a party anymore. I don't like using the term Republican Party because it is basically a storm front for an armed insurrection. That's all it is. We have to start talking about them that way. We have to recognize that Tucker Carlson is not a journalist. He's basically a spokesperson for a revolutionary movement to overturn this country and turn it into a white nationalist state. That's what's going on. Any other terminology and we play into it. And I hope that we recognize that this is war. This is war for the future of this country. One side is ready and fighting and has already launched their first salvo, and the other side is trying to figure out if they want to vote on it. That's what I see this point as being. And I hope we don't look back on the summer of 2021 and regret the decisions that weren't made to protect this country.
You know, and Aaron, the reaction sometimes from the right is that this conversation is hyperbolic, but the proof is in the pudding. Heritage wrote sample legislation that is being debated or passed in 47 states. There was no voter fraud. Bill Barr said so. Mitch McConnell at one point said so. Chris Christie has said so. Yet 47 state legislatures are debating legislation that is to address something that's non-existent. So that's how detached the Republican policymaking process is from reality. The other thing is the census. The other thing is the history of midterms. The president's party typically losing some seats. Now, there are exceptions. 2002 was one of them. I was in the White House, so I always like to put that on the record. But what do you make of sort of the posture of each party? I agree with Jason. For the Republicans, this is war, this is existential, and they're going to change the rules to vote.
Yeah, and what we've seen is kind of all along, the Republican Party and at least especially its leaders haven't necessarily echoed the things that Donald Trump says about massive fraud, about hundreds of thousands of votes flipping in Detroit overnight or something like that. They've instead, and even in the Supreme Court case, the amicus brief that we saw from House Republicans was narrower. It was talking about irregularities. It was talking about the idea that certain states weren't perhaps following their election laws. I think Republicans have argued that they don't want to talk about the 2020 election, but they're having a very different conversation than the president has been having. It still serves the same purpose, which is crafting these new laws that were initially predicated on these irregularities or these supposed irregularities. And now they're basically trying to save the point. They're very close to winning back the House and the Senate in 2022. They may not even have to rewrite those laws if that's actually the strategy here. And so what we've seen is really this party trying to make the best of a bad situation, trying to take what the president's saying and really water it down into something that's at least more defensible to their base when it comes to crafting these new laws.
Jason Johnson, Aaron Blake, thank you for going deep with me and for spending some time with us. It's great to see both of you.